It was a bright and busy morning at the bustling international airport, where travelers hurried through security lines and gate lounges, clutching their boarding passes and steaming cups of coffee. Among them was Maya Thompson, a skilled and respected pilot, preparing for her next flight. Maya's poise and confidence made her stand out, her crisp uniform and calm demeanor reflecting the years of hard work and dedication she had put into her career. She was used to handling pressure, whether it was in the cockpit or dealing with the occasional disgruntled passenger, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. As Maya walked through the terminal toward her gate, a commotion near the waiting area caught her attention. Standing at the center of the scene was a woman, visibly upset, waving her arms dramatically as she argued with an airline employee. The woman, later identified as Karen Lewis, was the embodiment of entitlement, dressed in designer clothes, and with an air of superiority that seemed to precede her. Her voice carried over the din of the terminal as she complained about her seat assignment, her tone sharp and condescending. Karen's frustration only grew when she spotted Maya approaching the gate. Something about Maya, perhaps her calm confidence or the authority her uniform commanded, seemed to set Karen off even more. As Maya stepped closer, Karen turned her eye toward her. "Are you kidding me?" Karen exclaimed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "This is the pilot." Her words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory, drawing the attention of other passengers nearby. Maya paused, her professional demeanor unwavering, but she could feel the weight of the stares from the onlookers. "Yes, ma'am, I am," Maya replied with a polite but firm tone, making direct eye contact. "Is there something I can assist you with?" Karen scoffed, crossing her arms as she looked Maya up and down. "I don't think so," she said, her words laced with hostility. "I just can't believe they'd let someone like you fly the plane. Isn't there anyone else qualified for this job?" Maya's heart sank at the implication, but she refused to let it show. She had faced her share of challenges as a black woman in aviation, a field still predominantly male and overwhelmingly white. Each achievement in her career had been hard-won, and she had vowed long ago never to let ignorance or prejudice diminish her sense of worth. Karen wasn't done though. She stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space. "This isn't safe. I demand to speak to someone in charge. There's no way I'm getting on that plane with you in the cockpit." A murmur rippled through the crowd, passengers exchanging uneasy glances as they watched the scene unfold. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her focus on Karen. "Ma'am, I assure you, I am fully qualified to fly this aircraft," she said, her voice steady. "If you have any concerns, I'd be happy to direct you to customer service." But Karen wasn't interested in reason or reassurance. Her voice grew louder, her accusations more pointed. Maya could see the airline employee nearby struggling to maintain control of the situation, but it was clear Karen was determined to make her grievances known. Then, in an instant, everything escalated. Karen's frustration boiled over, and before anyone could intervene, she lashed out in a shocking act of aggression. The room seemed to freeze as gasps echoed from the crowd. Maya staggered back, stunned, not by the pain of the blow, but by the sheer audacity of the act. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, and then chaos erupted. Security personnel rushed to the scene as passengers pulled out their phones, recording the shocking incident. Karen's tirade was far from over, but now all eyes were on her, and the consequences of her actions were about to unfold in ways no one could have anticipated. What happened next would leave everyone watching, and the world at large absolutely stunned. The terminal erupted in chaos. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as passengers scrambled to understand what had just happened. Phones were out in full force now, capturing every angle of the unfolding drama. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of anger and shock, as if even she couldn't believe what she'd done. Maya, steadying herself, didn't touch her cheek where the impact landed. Her years of training in crisis management kicked in, and she held her ground with a composed demeanor that belied the turmoil she felt inside. Security personnel, clad in crisp uniforms, arrived within seconds, their presence adding to the tension. The lead officer, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, approached Karen swiftly. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the commotion. Karen, still caught up in her indignation, turned on the officer. "Do you see what I'm dealing with here?" she said, pointing a manicured finger at Maya. "This is unacceptable. She shouldn't even be in that position." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. We need to address this matter calmly." He gestured for a colleague to assist Maya, who stood tall despite the weight of the stairs and whispers around her. Maya raised a hand subtly, indicating she was okay. "I'm fine," she said quietly, her voice steady but laced with disappointment. She didn't want this moment to spiral any further. Her focus remained on maintaining her professionalism, even in the face of blatant disrespect. As the officer led Karen toward a quieter area, she resisted, her voice still ringing through the terminal. "I'm not going anywhere until someone explains to me how this happened," she shouted, her words drawing a collective wince from onlookers. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering among themselves. Did she really hit her? One man muttered to his companion, "What's her problem?" Another woman asked, shaking her head in disbelief. Meanwhile, Maya took a moment to collect herself. A kind older woman in the crowd approached her hesitantly. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. Maya managed a small smile. "I'm okay. Thank you for asking," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. As Karen continued her tirade in the background, Maya couldn't help but reflect on the countless obstacles she had faced to get to where she was. Being a pilot had been her dream since she was a little girl, watching planes soar across the sky. She had worked tirelessly, excelling in school, acing flight training, and overcoming the biases that too often came with being both a woman and a person of color in a male-dominated industry. Every step of the way, she had to prove herself, not just as a capable pilot, but as someone deserving of respect. This moment was a painful reminder of just how far society still had to go. But Maya had learned long ago not to let moments like these define her. She focused on what she could control, her actions, her words, and her unwavering commitment to her responsibilities. As the situation unfolded, the airline's supervisor arrived, a middle-aged man with a calm yet authoritative presence. He approached Maya first, concern etched on his face. "Captain Thompson, I just heard what happened. Are you sure you're okay?" Maya nodded, her voice steady. "I'm fine, thank you. I just want to ensure this situation doesn't disrupt the flight schedule or the passenger's experience." The supervisor looked at her with admiration, clearly impressed by her composure. "We'll take care of this," he assured her. "You focus on what you do best." Meanwhile, Karen's outburst continued, though her tone was beginning to shift. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the sight of multiple phones recording her every move seemed to give her pause. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, folding her arms defensively. "I was just expressing my concerns." The lead security officer, however, was not swayed. "Ma'am, your behavior was unacceptable, and we have witnesses who can attest to what happened. Please cooperate. All have no choice but to involve law enforcement." Karen's face turned pale at the mention of law enforcement. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her features. "Law enforcement? That's not necessary," she stammered, her bravado fading. As Karen was escorted away to a more private area, the tension in the terminal began to ease. Passengers slowly returned to their routines, though the incident remained the hot topic of conversation. Some openly voiced their support for Maya, while others speculated about what might happen next. In the midst of it all, Maya prepared to board the plane. Her focus remained on her passengers, her crew, and the job she loved. She knew that incidents like this, while painful, were not the sum of her journey. They were moments that revealed the biases that still existed, but also moments that showcased her resilience and strength. As she walked onto the plane, the crew greeted her with warm smiles and quiet reassurances. They had witnessed the incident and were eager to show their support. "We've got your back, Captain," one flight attendant said softly, placing a hand on Maya's arm. "Thank you," Maya replied, her gratitude genuine. She knew she wasn't alone in this. For every Karen out there were also people who recognized and respected her for who she was and what she had accomplished. But as the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Karen's actions had crossed a line, and the repercussions were only beginning to unfold. What would happen next was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This incident would leave a lasting impact, not just on Maya and Karen, but on everyone who witnessed it. As the plane taxied on the runway, Maya's mind raced. She was focused on the task at hand, running through her pre-flight checklist and maintaining clear communication with air traffic control. But in the quiet moments between her duties, fragments of the incident replayed in her head. She couldn't help but wonder how it had escalated so quickly. Despite her years of experience, this encounter had hit her on a deeper level. It wasn't just about Karen's words or actions. It was about the persistent challenges that came with simply doing her job. In the cabin, passengers whispered among themselves. Some were shaken by the earlier scene, while others debated whether Karen's actions were a reflection of her personal prejudices or something more systemic. A young boy seated by the window turned to his father. "Dad, why was that lady so mad at the pilot?" he asked, his innocent curiosity piercing through the tension. The father hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. "Well, son, some people don't treat others fairly because of how they look," he said quietly, choosing his words carefully. "But that doesn't make it right. The pilot is doing her job, just like anyone else." The boy nodded, his gaze returning to the window as the plane began to lift off. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Karen was facing a very different reality. Escorted to a small office by airport security, she sat stiffly in a chair, her earlier bravado replaced by a growing sense of unease. The room felt smaller by the second as the lead officer returned with a clipboard and a stern expression. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the statements and footage from the incident," he said, placing the clipboard on the desk. "What you did was not only inappropriate, but also could have serious legal consequences. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen shifted uncomfortably, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her designer handbag. "It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I was upset and she wasn't listening." The officer raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Upset or not, your actions were unacceptable. We'll be filing a report, and you may be contacted by authorities for further investigation." Karen's face flushed as the weight of the situation settled on her. She had always been able to talk her way out of trouble before, but this time felt different. The security officer's firm tone and the presence of multiple witnesses made it clear she couldn't charm her way out of this one. While Karen grappled with the immediate fallout, another subplot was unfolding on social media. Several passengers had uploaded videos of the incident, and within hours, the footage began to go viral. Comments flooded in from around the world, some expressing outrage at Karen's behavior, others praising Maya for her calm and professional response. The hashtags #SupportMaya and #FlyWithHer started trending, turning what had been a private moment into a public conversation. Maya was unaware of the growing online storm as she focused on safely navigating the plane to its destination. Her co-pilot, a seasoned aviator named Jack, glanced over at her during a quiet moment. "You doing okay?" he asked, his tone warm but concerned. Maya nodded, her hand steady on the controls. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried a hint of weariness. "Just another day in the life, right?" Jack frowned slightly. "It shouldn't have to be," he said, his words lingering in the air. They both knew the truth of it. Maya's journey in aviation had always been harder than it should have been, not because of her skills or dedication, but because of the biases she faced at every turn. As the flight continued, one passenger in particular found himself reflecting deeply on what he'd witnessed. Marcus, a middle-aged businessman seated in first class, had initially dismissed the incident as another airport scuffle, but as he replayed the scene in his mind, he began to feel a pang of guilt. He had been close enough to hear Karen's words and see her actions, yet he hadn't stepped in or spoken up. Instead, he had stayed silent, worried about drawing attention to himself. Now, watching the calm professionalism of the flight crew, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his silence had made him complicit. He resolved to do something about it, though he wasn't yet sure what that would be. Back on the ground, Karen's ordeal wasn't over. As she exited the security office, her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and notifications. She hesitated before checking it, only to find a flood of messages from friends, family, and even strangers. Some were supportive, others critical, and a few were outright angry. The videos of her outburst had reached her circle, and the reactions were overwhelming. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from her sister, who rarely reached out unless it was important. "Karen, what were you thinking?" The text read. "You need to make this right before it gets worse." Karen stared at the message, her jaw tightening. She wasn't sure she even knew how to make things right. As the plane descended toward its destination, Maya prepared for the landing with her usual precision. Her focus was unwavering, even as she caught snippets of conversations among the crew about the incident. She knew she couldn't control what people thought or said, but she could control how she carried herself. And that, she decided, would be enough for now. What none of them knew was that the events of the day were just the beginning. The ripples of this incident would extend far beyond the terminal and the flight. It would spark conversations, reveal hidden truths, and force everyone involved to confront their own beliefs and actions. But for now, the tension lingered, unresolved, as the plane touched down on the runway, carrying with it the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. The sun was beginning to set as the plane taxied to the gate, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Inside the cockpit, Maya exhaled quietly, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. The flight had been smooth, the landing precise, exactly what she strived for every time. But the unease from earlier still lingered, a constant hum at the back of her mind. She knew the incident in the terminal was likely far from over, and as much as she wanted to focus solely on her job, the memory of Karen's words and actions weighed heavily on her. In the cabin, the passengers began to gather their belongings, the hum of conversation growing louder as they prepared to disembark. Many of them stole glances toward the cockpit door, their curiosity and concern for Maya evident. A few had made quiet resolutions to find her and express their support before leaving, but most were unsure how to approach her. They didn't want to intrude or make her feel uncomfortable, but they also didn't want her to feel alone. Among them was Marcus, the businessman who had spent much of the flight lost in thought. As the plane came to a stop, he hesitated, still unsure of what he could say to make a difference. But deep down, he knew that remaining silent wasn't an option this time. Gathering his courage, he waited near the front of the plane, determined to speak with Maya before she left. Meanwhile, in the terminal of their destination, the tension was building in a different way. Karen had been rebooked on another flight after her confrontation with security, but her problems had followed her. Several passengers on her new flight recognized her from the viral videos, and whispers spread quickly through the waiting area. Karen could feel the weight of their stares and hear the murmurs as she walked to her gate. For the first time in her life, she felt truly exposed, her carefully curated image of control and authority crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a news outlet. A reporter had picked up the story, framing it as an example of both discrimination and public accountability in the digital age. Karen's name wasn't mentioned yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Panic set in as she realized the full scope of what she had done. It wasn't just an embarrassing moment anymore. It was a story that had captured the attention of thousands, maybe millions of people, and she was at the center of it. Back on the plane, Maya was preparing to exit when Marcus approached her. He cleared his throat, his nerves evident, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Captain Thompson, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened earlier, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Maya turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means a lot to hear that." Encouraged by her response, Marcus continued, "I should have spoken up back there. I should have said something. But I didn't, and that's on me. I just want you to know that what you do, what you represent, it matters. And there are people who see that, even if we don't always show it. Maya's smile widened slightly, though her eyes remained thoughtful. I appreciate that, she said. It's not always easy, but moments like this remind me why I keep going. Thank you for saying something. As Marcus stepped aside, giving her space to leave, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. For every Karen, there were people like Marcus, people who wanted to do better, even if they didn't always know how. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Outside the terminal, the evening air was crisp, and Maya walked with purpose toward her hotel shuttle. She was looking forward to some quiet time to reflect and recharge before her next flight. But her phone buzzed before she could even sit down, and a message from the airline's corporate office popped up on the screen. They wanted a detailed account of the incident for their official report. Maya sighed, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She knew how important it was to document everything accurately. But reliving the moment felt like reopening a wound. Still, she began to type, her words measured and precise, ensuring the truth of the situation was clear. At the same time, Karen sat alone in her seat at the gate, her thoughts a whirlwind. For all her bravado, she couldn't deny that her actions had spiraled out of control. The words of the security officer and the messages from her sister echoed in her mind, each one adding to her growing sense of guilt and shame. But instead of confronting those feelings, she buried them, telling herself that she had been provoked, that she was the victim of an overreaction. The tension in the airport grew as Karen noticed more passengers pointing in her direction, their whispers growing louder. A young woman nearby finally spoke up, her voice cutting through the din. "You're the one from that video, aren't you? The one who hit the pilot?" Karen froze, her face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said sharply, though her voice lacked conviction. The young woman wasn't deterred. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said, her tone firm. "That pilot is out there doing her job, and you had no right to treat her like that." Karen's fists clenched, but she didn't respond. For the first time, she realized she had no defense, no excuse that would justify what she had done. The realization hit her like a wave, leaving her feeling exposed and powerless. As the tension in the airport and on social media reached a boiling point, Maya prepared for the next day, her thoughts on the future. She didn't know what would come of the incident, whether it would fade into memory or spark a larger conversation about respect, equality, and accountability. But one thing was certain, the story wasn't over yet, and when the final confrontation came, it would change everything. As the night settled over the bustling city, Maya sat by the window of her hotel room, the city lights twinkling below her. She sipped a cup of tea, trying to push the events of the day out of her mind. But even as she stared at the skyline, her phone buzzed incessantly on the table, a constant reminder that her day was far from over. Against her better judgment, she picked it up and unlocked the screen. Her heart sank as she saw the sheer volume of notifications. Social media posts, texts from colleagues, and even an email from the airline's public relations team filled her inbox. The story had spread farther than she ever imagined. Among the flood of messages, one email caught her eye. It was from a passenger on her flight. "Marcus." She opened it cautiously, unsure of what to expect. His words were simple but heartfelt. He apologized again for his earlier silence and explained that he had been inspired by her grace under pressure. But what stood out most was his final line. "I want to help make sure something like this doesn't happen again." Maya stared at the words, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. What did he mean by that? And what was he planning to do? Meanwhile, back at the airport, Karen's night had taken an unexpected turn. Just as she thought she could slip away unnoticed, a representative from the airline approached her at the gate. He was a young man, polite but firm, and he handed her an envelope with the airline's logo. "Ms. Davis," he said, addressing her formally, "this is for you." Karen opened the envelope with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the neatly printed letter inside. It was a formal notice from the airline, informing her that her behavior earlier in the day was under review and that she might face consequences, including being placed on the airline's no-fly list. The blood drained from her face as she reread the words. She had underestimated how seriously the airline would take the incident. But what really unsettled her was the final line of the letter. Asterisk further actions will depend on the outcome of an internal investigation and the testimony of Captain Thompson. Asterisk. Karen's grip tightened on the letter. It wasn't just the airline she had to worry about now. It was Maya. Her career, her reputation. Everything could hinge on what Maya decided to say about her. While Karen grappled with the potential fallout, another layer of the story was quietly unfolding online. A journalist from a prominent news outlet had picked up the viral video and was digging deeper. She had reached out to both Maya and Karen for comment, framing the story as a larger discussion about professionalism, bias, and accountability. Maya had declined to respond, choosing to focus on her work instead. But Karen, desperate to control the narrative, had agreed to an interview. She was determined to present her side of the story, painting herself as a victim of overreaction and misunderstanding. The interview aired late that night, and it wasn't long before it sparked even more controversy. Karen's words were defensive and deflective, filled with thinly veiled justifications for her behavior. "I was frustrated," she said, her tone almost pleading. "I was trying to protect myself and other passengers. I didn't mean for things to escalate." The backlash was swift. Viewers saw through her excuses, flooding social media with comments calling her out. But a few voices stood out, questioning whether Karen's actions were indicative of a deeper systemic issue. "This isn't just about one woman's behavior," one tweet read. "It's about the biases and barriers people like Captain Thompson face every day." Maya, unaware of Karen's interview at the time, was preparing for her next flight early the next morning. But as she stepped into the airport, she was greeted with an unexpected sight. A small group of people stood near the check-in counter, holding signs of support. Asterisk, "We stand with Captain Thompson." Asterisk, one sign read, while another said, asterisk, "Equality in the skis." Asterisk, Maya froze, her heart pounding. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the sudden display of solidarity left her feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. Among the group was Marcus, his presence catching her by surprise. He stepped forward, his expression earnest. "I didn't mean to ambush you," he said quickly. "I just thought, well, people need to see that we support you." Maya didn't know what to say. She was grateful for the gesture, but she couldn't ignore the complications it might bring. The airline valued professionalism and discretion, and she worried the show of support might be seen as disruptive. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "But I have a job to do, and I don't want anything to take away from that." Marcus nodded, understanding her hesitation. "We won't interfere," he promised. "We just wanted you to know you're not alone." As Maya walked toward the gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling in ways she couldn't control. Karen's actions had set off a chain of events that was now bigger than both of them. And as the tension continued to build, Maya knew the moment of reckoning was approaching. Whatever happened next, it would change the course of everything, for her, for Karen, and for everyone watching. The morning sky was streaked with hues of orange and gold as Maya prepared for her next flight. Despite her resolve to focus on her duties, the tension from the previous day was impossible to ignore. The growing public support, the airline's inquiry, and Karen's actions loomed in her thoughts. Still, Maya took a deep breath as she slipped into the cockpit, her fingers moving instinctively over the controls. Flying had always been her sanctuary, and today would be no different. The terminal was buzzing with energy as passengers boarded, but in a quiet corner, Karen sat alone, clutching her boarding pass. Her meeting with the airline's representative had rattled her more than she cared to admit, and the thought of seeing Maya again made her stomach churn. She felt cornered, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. As much as she wanted to hold on to her version of events, deep down, she knew she had crossed a line. Just as the final passengers boarded, Karen spotted a figure she didn't expect, her sister Beth. Beth approached her with a determined look, her tone firm but laced with concern. "Karen, I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "This isn't who you are. At least it's not who you used to be." Karen stiffened, her face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. "You don't understand," she began, but Beth cut her off. "No, you don't understand," Beth said sharply. "You embarrassed yourself, and worse, you hurt someone who didn't deserve it. You need to take responsibility, Karen. Pretending this didn't happen or blaming everyone else isn't going to fix it." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. For once, she had no rebuttal. Beth's words struck a chord she couldn't ignore, and for the first time, Karen found herself questioning her actions. On the plane, Maya was performing her final pre-flight checks when a knock on the cockpit door startled her. It was a flight attendant, her expression apologetic. "Captain Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a passenger requesting to speak with you. She says it's urgent." Maya frowned, a flicker of apprehension passing through her. "Who is it?" she asked. The flight attendant hesitated before answering. "It's Karen Davis." Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. "Tell her I'm preparing for takeoff," she said calmly. "If it's important, she can speak with me after the flight." The attendant nodded and relayed the message, but Karen wasn't deterred. She scribbled a note on a napkin and handed it over. When Maya received it, she unfolded the napkin to find a short, scribbled message. Asterisk, "I need to apologize. Please let me explain." Asterisk. Maya stared at the note, her emotions a swell of anger, frustration, and curiosity. Against her better judgment, she decided to hear Karen out. After the flight, she folded the napkin and tucked it away, her focus returning to the task at hand. The flight itself was uneventful, but Maya couldn't shake the anticipation of what awaited her once they landed. When the plane finally touched down and the passengers disembarked, Karen lingered near the gate, waiting. Maya approached her with measured steps, her expression neutral but guarded. Karen looked up, her face a mixture of guilt and determination. "Captain Thompson," she began, her voice unsteady. I owe you an apology, a real one." Maya crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Go on," she said, her tone calm, but firm. Karen took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I let my frustration and my own biases get the better of me. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did, and I definitely shouldn't have acted the way I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Maya studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her eyes. She didn't reply immediately, and the silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice even but firm. "It's not about me forgiving you. It's about what you do next. Words are easy, but actions matter more." Karen nodded, her face pale but resolute. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'll do better. I have to." Before either of them could say more, a commotion erupted nearby. A journalist had appeared, camera in hand, aiming for an interview with Maya. "Captain Thompson, can we have a moment? The public is eager to hear your side of the story," the reporter said, their voice cutting through the crowd. Maya glanced at Karen, then back at the journalist. Taking a deep breath, she held up a hand to stop them. "I appreciate the interest, but I'm just here to do my job," she said firmly. "This story isn't about me. It's about professionalism and respect for everyone, no matter who they are." The reporter hesitated but eventually nodded, lowering the camera. Maya turned back to Karen, her expression softening just slightly. "Take care of yourself," she said before walking away, leaving Karen to face her own reckoning. Later that evening, Maya checked her phone to find an unexpected update. The airline had issued a public statement supporting her and announcing new measures to address bias and discrimination. But what surprised her most was a short video clip circulating online. Karen, speaking at a press conference, acknowledging her mistakes, and pledging to use her platform to promote understanding and equality. Maya set her phone down, a small smile tugging at her lips. The day had been long and the journey far from over, but for the first time in a while, she felt a sense of hope. The skies were unpredictable, but with every flight, every moment, she was helping to chart a better course. As the evening gave way to a quiet night, Maya finally returned to her hotel room. The day's events replayed in her mind like a film stuck on loop. The flight, the confrontation with Karen, and the unexpected turn of seeing her apology unfold in such a public way. Sitting by the window again, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The city lights below seemed less daunting now, as if the world had softened just a bit. She sipped a glass of water, her thoughts drifting to the people who had supported her, strangers who had stood with her and colleagues who had reached out quietly with messages of encouragement. Her phone buzzed on the table. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of her. It was a notification from the airline's internal messaging system. The message was short and professional. Captain Thompson, thank you for your composure and professionalism throughout recent events. The leadership team commends your actions and stands fully in support of you. We are proud to have you represent this airline. Maya set the phone down with a small, tired smile. It wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about what this moment represented. For every battle she had fought quietly, for every time she had felt unseen, today had been different. People had noticed, and that mattered. It wasn't just her fight anymore. The recognition didn't erase the challenges she had faced, but it reminded her that change was possible, even if it came one step at a time. Across the city, Karen was having a very different kind of evening. After her press conference, she had returned to her home, where she now sat in her living room surrounded by the remnants of a chaotic day. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop with messages, some supportive, others harshly critical. She stared at the screen, overwhelmed, but determined to follow through on what she had promised. Beth sat across from her, arms folded but with a softer expression than earlier. You did the right thing, Karen, she said gently. It's not going to fix everything overnight, but it's a start. Karen nodded, though her throat felt tight. I let things get so out of hand. I don't know how to make up for it. You can't erase the past, Beth replied, but you can decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward. That's what matters. Karen swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. I don't want to be the person people hate, she admitted. I want to do better. Beth reached out and placed a hand on her sister's. Then start by listening, by understanding, and by not running from the uncomfortable parts. It's not easy, but it's worth it. The next morning, Maya arrived at the airport for another day on the job. The terminal felt less heavy now, the weight of the past few days lifting slightly. As she walked toward her gate, she noticed a familiar figure standing nearby. It was Marcus, holding a cup of coffee and looking hesitant. Captain Thompson, he said, stepping forward. I know you probably don't want more attention, but I wanted to say thank you for everything. Maya raised an eyebrow, amused but touched. Thank me? For what? For showing strength, Marcus said simply. And for reminding me that staying silent isn't enough. I've got some work to do too. Maya smiled, the first genuine one in what felt like days. We all do, she said. But it's never too late to start. As Marcus walked away, Maya felt a sense of closure settling over her. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight, but moments like this, small, quiet acts of acknowledgement, made the journey worthwhile. Later that day, after landing her flight and returning to her hotel, Maya decided to check social media. The video of Karen's apology had been shared widely, and the comments were a mix of skepticism and hope. One in particular caught her eye. Growth is uncomfortable, but necessary. If we're willing to face our mistakes, we can build a better world together. Maya stared at the words for a long moment before closing the app. She didn't need to follow every comment or every development. She had done her part, and now it was time to focus on what came next, both in her career and in her life. The skies were unpredictable, but she had learned to navigate them with resilience and grace. For Karen, the days that followed were filled with introspection and difficult conversations. She had started attending workshops on bias and accountability, not to perform for the public, but to genuinely understand the harm she had caused. It was uncomfortable and humbling, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was on a path toward becoming someone she could be proud of. Months later, Maya and Karen crossed paths again, not in the skies, but at an industry event focused on diversity and inclusion. Maya was there as a speaker, sharing her experiences and advocating for systemic change within the airline industry. Karen was in the audience, quietly listening, taking notes, and reflecting on how far she still had to go. After the event, Karen approached Maya, her steps tentative but determined. "Captain Thompson," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I don't expect you to remember me, but—" "I remember," Maya interrupted, her tone calm but kind. "And I've seen the work you've been doing."